Hey guys, this is Kitchen Table Research, and today we are back with part 2 of Israel Keys. In the first video, we got into his childhood, how he came from a large, highly religious family. As a child, we learned that he would slaughter animals. He engaged in arson. He would shoot BB guns into people's property. We talked about him breaking and entering, stealing just small items for the fun of it. And also, he would become obsessed with hunting, not like most people in that area that hunt for game, but rather just for fun. This community that he grew up in, the Pacific Northwest, bred some of America's next homegrown smearists. Their anti American neo in beliefs would trigger a cascade of violence across America. We touched on Chevy Kehoe, which led to the Waco siege and the Oklahoma City bombing. However, in my opinion, I don't think the government was well equipped with how to deal with this situation. And since then, our government has received some flack about how they handled Waco and Ruby Ridge. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, one of the funny things I came across in my research is considering the family was fairly, very actually anti Semitic, I think it's really interesting that they named their kid Israel.
Yeah, it is pretty weird.
Okay. So, Keys left, he was honorably discharged from the military, so he served his 4 years. And he ends up marrying Tammy, the mother of his child. Now, Tammy would go on to state that Keys was a pompous a-hole, arrogant, and a high-functioning alcoholic. He, in one night, could consume a bottle of wine, a handle, and a sixer.
It's impressive.
That is impressive. What do you think about him going from the military to then becoming like a high-functioning alcoholic because you were in the military?
It sounds pretty familiar.
Pretty on par, huh?
Yeah, it's actually fairly easy to be highly functioning alcoholic because everybody just tells you what to do and everything's structured. So that's pretty common. They get in the real world and that's a lot more difficult.
Well, and I think the military teaches you to be organized and to like stay to a schedule, which I think Israel like carries into the way his modus operandi works.
Yeah, it makes sense.
There's a lot of unknowns. They've only ever identified 3 official victims for Keys, but I want to touch on a couple of girls were hiking, Mary Cooper and Susanna Stoden in Washington, and they were shot while hiking. Bones and a prosthetic that one of the women wore were found in 1996. However, I'm not going to put that in to his victimology just yet, and I'm going to tell you why. Because in 1997, 1998, he had kidnapped a minor woman. He SA'd her. He wanted to unalive her, but she convinced him to let her go. Keys would later quote, "I wasn't violent enough, and I made up my mind at that point that I was never going to let another person go. Like, I was never going to let that happen again." So, because in 97, 98, he SAs and does not unalive the victim, it makes me feel like the 1996 bodies that were found probably aren't Keys.
Yeah. So it sounds like he didn't quite have the nerve to be as violent as he needed to be, and he told himself that was the last time he was ever going to hesitate.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. So, Tammy and Keys and their daughter live in Washington, and she is part of the Indian reservation. And so he goes to work for the Parks and Reservations Department on the reservations. So in 2001, the FBI believes that that was Keys' first official unaliving. Now, we don't know her name, but according to Keys, he delivered a blow to the head, but didn't mean to unalive this person, which really kind of contradicts that 97, 98 quote where he says, "I'm never going to do that again." So he's kind of like saying, he's kind of like backtracking, like, yeah, "Oh, I didn't mean to."
Or he meant to, but not with that specific blow.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe he had
something else planned.
Yeah, something else planned. After this, Keys would begin to start traveling for work. He rented a car in Salt Lake City in 2001. He drove 522 miles on that rental car. We don't know if he committed any unalivings on this trip, but the MO of Keyes would be to rent a car, fly to another state, rent a car, drive across state lines, unalive somebody, drive across state lines again to dump them in another state, and then drive or fly out of another state. So
probably really taking advantage of states not talking to each other, police departments not sharing DNA.
Exactly. And so this is kind of where people believe that Keyes is like some mastermind, that this is some, crazy idea that he had come up with, which in my opinion, as we touched on in the first video, this isn't really like a mastermind plan. To me, it just shows again that he has patience.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go that far. I would say it sounds like he started traveling. That was his work schedule regardless. And so he probably just adhered his work schedule to his killing schedule.
Well, not only that, but he would also adhere it to his love for fishing.
Yeah.
And would buy fishing licenses while in those states.
Yeah.
And we'll get into this, but he would buy a license and then dump somebody in the area that he bought the fishing license in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's genius. I just think it's convenience.
Convenience. So like you stated, changing MOs, changing state lines, it does make it harder to profile, to find the victimology, which is why we do not have an official body count for Keyes. So his third unaliving, he is in Washington State at the time. He states that he buried 2 bodies in a lake in Washington State that he had weighted down with milk jugs. These victims, he stated he had sharp force weaponed them. So again, we have a change of modus operandi. The first official one, was a blow to the head, blunt force trauma. The second one, now we have sharp force trauma.
Yeah.
Is it escalation or is it just a change in his MO to mix up police? I don't know. So during this time, Tammy is back in Washington State taking care of their daughter. And unfortunately, Tammy, although she was a nurse practitioner, had developed a pretty bad smopioid problem. So Keyes and Tammy got divorced. And after that, Keyes would go onto Match.com and meet a woman that goes by Kimberly. They've never released her official name.
Luckier.
He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
He's got time for dating, fishing, traveling. And at this time, he meets Kimberly and she receives a job in Alaska. And so they move to the state of Alaska, where Keyes is going to open Keyes Construction in 2007. This is the first time after he moves to Alaska that he upgrades to burying the kill kits, which is really what Israel Keyes is known for in the true crime world, is these kill kits that he would bury all over America and have access to while he was traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can tell there's an escalation. Like the first time he buried a kill kit, he made a mistake and he buried it in wood. And as we know, he dumps bodies around water. And so that kit had flooded and it had rusted the gun and ammunition and some of the degraded some of like the ropes and ties and stuff. So he kind of like effed up that one.
Mm-hmm.
So then he moves on to putting these, sharp force weapons, ropes, zip ties, gloves, all of these things into 5-gallon plastic barrels. So these kill kits are obviously going to give him quick access. And this also, I think in the back of Israel's mind, he can almost live his fantasy while he's at home in Alaska, per se, knowing that he's hidden these kits around. Like, I think it gives him this, like, arrogance of, like, I'm smarter, or, lets him kind of relive the fantasy or know he has a future fantasy, knowing that these kits are being buried around the states.
Well, how many did he bury?
We don't know. Actually, 2 have only officially been found. One was found in Washington State, and actually, one was found in New York, which leads us to our next victim, which is Deb Feldman.